Fishing is often a game of cast and hope, but every now and then you can actually see the fish you're trying to catch, and we're going to talk about that on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. Of course, brought to us always by the folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. You can visit them at any one of 140 plus stores nationwide or at sportsmans.com. And yes, they will ship directly to the store closest to you. And also don't forget about the guys and girls at Peterson Toyota in Fort Collins, Colorado, ready to take care of all of your car, truck, and maintenance needs. Those guys love to fish. I can tell you from personal experience, I've had them all on the boat. So if you do swing in there, tell them I said hello. Guys, here it is, April, I think it's the 18th of April. It is Friday. Here in Colorado at my house, it is snowing a whiteout right now. We were like 60-some degrees a couple days ago, and typical here in Colorado this time of year, it decided to change. And not complaining, happy to have it. Got a bunch of office work to do today, so it's fine. But we got probably 6 inches of snow, supposed to snow all day and all night. So pretty cool to see that, and definitely changes the look of the lake a little bit. Everything's just starting to green up as we head into spring, and a little fresh snow makes it all look really nice. I happen to have a couple gallons of lamb stock simmering down in the kitchen upstairs, and the wood stove's cranking down here in my office. So not complaining at all. But the topic I wanted to talk about today is something that I feel like it's a fringe thing a little bit, and I don't generally like to do too much stuff that's fringe topic. But the flip side is there's a lot of scenarios where this is relevant, and so I figured I'd talk about it. You guys let me know what you think on it, and that's the same thing every podcast. If there's something you'd like to see me talk about or discuss, or film for that matter, definitely let me know. We're all ears on that, and I'm in it for you guys, and so you tell me if there's some topic you like or want to hear about. Be glad to discuss it. This one came as a suggestion from a friend who was curious about it a little bit, and so I thought I'd address it. So what we wanted to talk about is fish you can see. Now, there's a lot of scenarios in which you can see fish, and how you address those fish is not the same. Depends on what exactly the fish is doing when you can see them. So in the case of, say, a spawning bass or bluegill, my answer, that's going to sit on a bed in a nest somewhere, you are going to get a different answer from me than, say, a trout you can see holding in current, which is going to be a different answer than a maybe carp that's cruising and sipping on the surface, which is going to be a different answer than other fish that you may see just cruising in open water, which we commonly see typically as they feed on the surface, or maybe in a saltwater scenario like flats fishing, things like that. But there's a lot of scenarios where the fish gives you his presence visually, and I'm not talking about electronics here. We're not talking about fish you can see on your forward-facing sonar. That's a whole different ballgame. I'm talking about fish you can actually lay your eyes on. And before we get too far into this conversation, there's one 800-pound gorilla in the room that has to be addressed, and that is your sunglasses. And I harp on sunglasses a lot. I'm a junkie for quality sunglasses, for lack of a better way to put it. I've been wearing Costas since the mid-90s, way before Costa was cool, because they make fantastic glass for viewing the water. And it may not be seeing the fish under the water. It may be able to have more to do with seeing your line on the surface of the water, cutting glare in general. But all of those things will help you not only catch more fish, but also have less eye strain, and also safety from the standpoint of a fly in the air or something like that as you're fly casting, hitting you in the face. So I wear Costas. I wear 2 basic lenses, particularly for sight fishing. I wear the Green Mirror, try it one more time. I wear the Green Mirror Costa 580 glass lens anytime the sun's out. And I wear the Sunrise Silver polarized glass lens anytime it's overcast. And those are basically the 2 lenses I wear. I've been wearing them for a long time. They're great lenses because they have amber base to them. So They're a little bit brighter than some other lenses. They are not a gray-based lens, which mutes all the color. There's a little bit of copper in the green mirror, and that lends to really, really good contrast between browns and greens, which is excellent for seeing things like, I don't know, a trout on the bottom of the river, or fish in tannin stained water, or any of the other things I've already mentioned, a bass sitting on a bed somewhere. So that's why I wear them. More importantly than that, or I shouldn't say more importantly, but as importantly as that is how they fit your face. And I was just watching a Bassmaster program the other day, and the guy had these really cool, trendy looking glasses on. They were all flat on the front, like is all the rage these days. And I get it, they look great when you're surfing, but dude was having to use both hands to cover the side of his glasses so he could see what was going on with the fish, because he was getting glare coming around the glass. So if you're picking a lens for picking a frame, I should say, for sight fishing or fishing in general, make sure it wraps around your face and keeps side glare out, whether that be a wraparound frame or a side shield or whatever it is. Make sure that they wrap around and cover your face, or you're going to look like the silly professional who chose glasses for style rather than functionality. This is fishing, not fashion we're talking about here, so keep that in mind. So the glasses are going to be a big step in all of this conversation, and that'll be the end of my glasses spiel right there. But all the way through from here to the end, understand that if you don't have high quality polarized glass lenses on, a lot of what I'm talking about is going to be difficult for you to see. And a lot of people say, oh, I just use cheap sunglasses, I use cheap, and they're fine, they're fine. They're fine, I get it, they're fine. They're not as fine as a quality pair. And I would rather have 50% less lures and a good pair of glasses than the other way around, because those glasses will catch me more fish than all those fancy lures will. If I can see where to put them, what my line's doing, what obstacles are underwater, what's on the surface, all of those things. So anyway, that's my spiel on glasses. Let's get to specific scenarios here. The obvious one is bed fishing. And bed fishing is not, for me, a preferred method. I have done a ton of it. When I was younger, it was a key thing for me. I've spent a tremendous amount of time fishing in Florida. Bass beds are the size of garbage can lids in a lot of cases. Big old bass laying on beds. Probably two of the top 5 biggest bass I've ever caught came off beds. I've done a lot of it. Not a fan of it because of proverbially speaking, a bass will sit there and let you shoot at him until you hit him, so to speak. In other words, I can make however many casts I need until they finally bite. And once I figured that out, I just kind of gave up on that whole thing. And then guiding with smallmouth, same kind of thing. I just didn't let people do it. But I've done a ton of it, and if you want to do it, knock yourself out. Please consider conservation when you are doing it. But at any rate, when you can see the bass, the first thing you always have to keep in mind, or any other fish, is the refraction of the surface of the water. So lately I've been with a neighbor kid doing some archery hunting for carp, and the whole shooting match there, he's been shooting them, I've been watching. The whole shooting match there is knowing how far low you need to aim to hit that fish based on the refraction of the light in the, on the surface of the water. The surface of the water bends the light, and therefore it is not where you think it is. So the first thing you have to keep in mind about sight fishing is typically the bass is closer to you horizontally than what they look, particularly the farther away they are or the deeper the water is. So when you're in real shallow water, you have less, what would you want to call it, I guess, offset or variance or whatever in where the fish is versus where your eyes are telling you he is. But the deeper the water gets, the more pronounced that gets, or the farther away the fish is, and what that really effectively means is the flatter you're looking at the surface of the water. So you have to keep that in mind first and foremost. Anytime I'm dealing with a fish that I can see, the last thing I want to do is drop the bait directly on the top of the fish. And the reason is you will spook more of them. I don't care if it's a fish that's feeding, if it's a fish that's guarding a nest, if it's a fish that's just stationary in a lane and holding, like you might do in current, that's not actively feeding, he's just stationed there and not hardly moving. If you hit them with the bait right off the bat, straight down, like where it falls right on them, you're definitely going to have a high percentage chance of spooking fish. There's a couple scenarios where something like a peacock bass or a smallmouth bass will sit there, and as a bait drops right on them, they'll just hit it out of pure anger rather than letting it hit them. But more often than not, they're going to spook out from under it. So the first thing I want to do is bring my bait into that fish from somewhere that it's approaching, not straight down on top of them from the surface. Because realistically, most things that get to a fish from straight above them is bad. Birds being the most common thing I think of, right? So if you can come into their angles, come into their view, come into their awareness at angles, you're going to be better off. So when we're talking about something like a bedding bass, or a bedding bluegill for that matter, I want to throw somewhere around the bed itself and then bring the bait into the bed. And usually when they'll pick it up, it's before it actually gets to the bed when you're talking about smallmouth. And with largemouth, you may have to get it right there more often than not to get them to actually pick it up. It depends on the fish, the mood of the fish, how much it's been harassed while it's been sitting on that bed, and also what stage the bed is in. So whether it be he just made the bed, if it's just the male there and he's guarding it, trying to prove to the local females that he can guard a bed, well then maybe as soon as it gets anywhere near the bed, he'll grab it. Conversely, if there's actual eggs in the nest and there's a male and a female, it may be that they're going to sit right on those eggs and not move to grab anything, and then you have to get it closer to them. Regardless, you have to observe that, and that goes back to the sunglasses, but you have to observe the behavior of the fish. So as the bait gets closer, you'll see that a fish is looking at it, but they may not just swim over and grab it right away. Now, I've seen smallmouth that as soon as the bait hits the water 5 feet away, they just leave the nest and smack it on principle alone. I've seen peacock bass do the same thing in Florida, where there's just reckless abandon. And great, if that's the case, then you can catch all of them. That's easy. But a lot of them will require nuances. And generally what that means is getting a bait farther away and then dragging it into wherever it needs to be, watching very, very, very closely as to what the sweet spot is where the fish gets annoyed. Now, somebody's going to say, how do you know when a fish is annoyed? And that's a valid question. What I look for is their body language. Same as a human, a deer, anything else. Reading their body language is really important. And you will notice in their fins, particularly the pectoral fins, they'll start paddling noticeably more. They will be finning back and forth and back and forth. They'll get irritated. You'll see them run up on a bait and back off, things like that. And it's up to you to continue to provoke the fish. And really it's a bedding scenario is one of the few that you'll get a chance to keep doing that over and over again, which is why I'm not a fan of it, because you literally, barring just doing something stupid like completely blowing them out with a boat, trolling motor or something, you can most often keep throwing at them for a long time. And that's what I don't like about it. But the big thing to take away from it is observe very closely what the behavior of the fish is, and understand that a lot of the time you will have a hard time getting that fish to actually commit to biting. You'll see them pick baits up and carry them away without actually getting the whole bait in their mouth. That's very common. You'll see scenarios like that. When it comes to bed fishing, I want to point out a lot of guys, particularly in the old school, were all about really bright colors, whites, bubblegum, chartreuses, so the bait could be more easily seen by the angler itself. And I'm going to tell you these days, and I used to be for that as well, but I got way more refusals doing that than if I throw a natural color. So for me, it comes down to scent and flavor and natural color. So I get the gulp out, something like a gulp craw, some kind of any gulp creature style bait. It could be even a little worm that's feeding down, or even a gulp minnow on a very, very, very short drop shot, like a 1-inch long drop shot, where it looks like the minnow is feeding down on the nest, can be a really good call. But the reality of the situation is that flavor, when a fish bites it, he's less inclined to spit it out in a giant hurry. And that's really what it comes down to. Then I can observe that the line moved, pretty good chance the fish has got the bait, and go from there. When I throw a real bright white bait, or a pink or whatever, like I mentioned, bubblegum, you'll get a lot of fish that will refuse it. I think they just know better that it's not really real, even though they don't want it there, and it's harder sometimes to get them to bite. So bedding fish are going to give you the most opportunity. I will say this, it's a great way to learn fish behavior, and I have actually gone bed fishing with no hooks just to watch. And incidentally, I've had fish pick up baits 15 times in a row, move it outside the nest, go right back to the nest. You put the bait back, they pick it up again, move it. Obviously, you could have caught that fish a bunch of times. So that's what it's all about right there. Now, let's go to other scenarios because, again, I'm not a huge fan of the bed fishing, mostly because in a lot of scenarios, the biggest fish in the system are the most easily picked off. And here where I live, on my home lake, the only time those fish are harvested, those fish being the big mature smallmouth, is when they show up right in front of the campgrounds and things like that on beds because they're so easy to catch, whereas the rest of the time they're not. So let's look at some other scenarios here. A classic one being trout in the rivers. I love this scenario. This is a whole different thing because the first thing I want to determine is that fish feeding or is that fish resting? And that's basically the only two things they do in the river is rest or feed outside of a spawning season. And we're not even going to talk about fishing for spawning trout. The trout police will rain down on me. It's bad juju, even though in most scenarios, at least here in my state, they don't reproduce successfully. Doesn't matter. Trout police don't like it. So we don't deal with that. We do deal with trout in current otherwise, though, and the first thing I want to do is determine is he feeding or not, and that will come down to his activity level. So a lot of times if I can actually see a fish, I'll observe him for several minutes just to see what he's doing. Is he moving side to side? In other words, is he going 6 inches that way, 4 inches this way, a foot that way? That tells me he's feeding low in the column. Am I seeing him move up and down as he's grabbing stuff? Well, that'll give me some more clues. Is he suspended in the middle and moving all over the place? Okay, well, that will give me some more clues. Like a trout in a plunge pool, you'll oftentimes see him suspended versus on the bottom or on the surface. Those will give me clues. But the first thing I want is a fish that's feeding, because if he's feeding, I have an even better shot at catching them. And if I see fish that are really sedate, clearly not feeding, obviously resting, which is most of the time, then I approach them slightly different than I would other fish. But the biggest thing is determining that first. And if they're feeding, you can get away with a lot of things. So I always, in that scenario, want the bait to come into the fish's peripheral vision. I don't want, and the bait, quote unquote, could be a whole variety of things. Regardless, I still want it to come in to the fish's peripheral vision, not from behind or directly in front. First of all, they don't see well directly in front, but more importantly, it becomes to some degree a threat, right? To the point where the fish may, if he doesn't immediately like the bait, he will dodge it. If it's coming from the peripheral vision, it'll give them more chance to look at it and decide if it's a real thing or not. It won't spook them as much. If it comes from directly behind, I can almost guarantee you're going to spook them every time. So the last thing I'm going to do is pull a bait upstream, and keeping in mind that upstream is the opposite of whichever direction the fish is facing. He literally might be facing the opposite direction the river's flowing because of an eddy. So keep that in mind. But you don't ever want to come into the fish's tail where you can't see it coming, all of a sudden it's there. They're going to spook almost all the time, even dominant fish. So keep that in mind there. So into the fish's peripheral vision. So I'd rather throw it up current of the fish and across, typically past the fish, and then drag it into whatever it's going to be, or swim it, as the case might be, into where the fish notices it. As soon as you notice that the fish noticed your bait, and again, we're back to the glasses, so if you see him pick your lure up or pick your bait up, you'll see him turn to look at it. That's when the real skills come in. Do I need to pull it away from him to make him chase it? Do I need to let him just come over and get it and see if he'll just swim over there and eat it on his own, which is the best case scenario? A lot of times when they do that, particularly if your bait's very big, they're going to swim over there and give it a little tiny nudge, and you're going to panic. But don't worry. As long as you don't do anything silly, you'll just bump it and go back to where he was going, and you'll know better for next time. But they don't have hands, so they'll come over there and just poke something, see if they like it or not. And I see that scenario a lot, particularly with trout that are either stockers or brookies. They will very commonly come and look at something, excuse me, and not do anything other than just give it a little kiss and swim back to where they came from. But a lot of the time you're better as soon as the fish notices the bait to pull it away from them. And what that effectively does is create the flight thing, right? It's prey. It realizes it's spotted and it splits, as a deer might do when it realizes it's about to get right to a mountain lion, right? It takes off. Well, that will get the fish oftentimes to pounce, and that's a really key thing. But trout and a current are one of my favorites. The biggest thing is approach them from up current and across. And whether it be above or below the trout will be a difference any given day. I've seen scenarios where if the bait left the bottom, they wouldn't pick it up. I've seen other scenarios where as long as it's floating on the surface, they'll come up and get it. That's going to change day in and day out. But what doesn't change is you can't approach them from behind. It's best most of the time not to approach them from directly in front of them and then bringing in from one side or the other as a peripheral vision, or swing it across in front of them where it's well ahead of them. In other words, it's going to come across the river a foot, 2, 3, 4 feet in front of the fish coming across the river and give them a chance to move up and get the bait on their own. But you effectively want the fish to go to the bait, not the bait to go to the fish. Just the opposite of bed fishing, okay? Now, another scenario which I really like and can be super fun is something like carp, where you can see them cruising, or bonefish on the flats, or redfish on the flats. Same scenario for all of those, which is why people call carp Rocky Mountain bonefish. I really think they're closer to redfish, but whatever. Hey, that's just a personal thing. They can be very, very spooky. They're typically in very shallow water. Most of the time, the farther you can stay away from them, the better off you're going to be. So I don't care if you're talking about a bonefish, a redfish, or a cruising carp. If you can get an accurate presentation to them without spooking them from 40 feet away, you're going to catch more of them than if you're 20 feet away. And if you can do it from 100 feet away, you can catch most of them. So one of the reasons that using a spinning rod to catch bonefish on the flats is so effective is because I can make literally a 40-yard throw if I need to, that's accurate enough to draw their attention and get them to bite from there, because at that point the fish basically has no clue you're there. So as long as you don't land the cast right on top of them, like I talked about, that's going to be the scenario. As a general rule, the clearer the water is, the farther in front of the fish I want to be. So a bonefish, a redfish, and a carp are typically all going to be a cruising species while they're working their way around in shallow water. I want to lead them as far as I think they can effectively see my bait. So the clearer the water, the farther in front of them I'll lead it. And then from there, something like a bonefish or a redfish, if you can get to the bottom before they see your bait, a lot of the time in that shallow water, as soon as that bait hits the bottom, you're good, because at that point it is no longer spooky to the fish. Then you can just drag it on the bottom right in front of them and get them to pick it up. Most of those fish will bite a lot of stuff if you don't spook them. Bonefish, people say, oh, they're so smart. No, they're not. They're dumb as rocks, but they're really observant because they live in shallow water, and most of the time it's crystal clear. So they worry about everything because they're in a dangerous spot, and their answer to everything is to leave and just go as fast as they can, which is really fast. Same thing with carp. When they spook in shallow water, they're out the door, albeit a whole bunch slower than a bonefish. But the key is to get the bait in the water ahead of the fish if you can. Now, in a scenario of carp in muddy water, you might be able to get closer to them, depending particularly if maybe you're on the bank and they're coming to you. That's an even better scenario. If you're waiting and you can get ahead of fish and let them feed their way to you, that's even better. That's even better. But if you're in a boat, then you have boat displaces water, they get pressure waves, they get hull slap as the water slaps against the boat. The trolling motor may make noise. You may make noise in the boat, opening and closing lids or stomping around or talking or whatever. All that will make fish spookier. But I've seen them in muddy water, particularly carp and redfish, in really stained water, where they'll let you get pretty close to right on top of them. At that point, it's all about making a really quiet lure entry. So picture a really good quality bass guy who's pitching heavy cover and his bait just barely slides into the water. That's the deal. And we filmed a sight fishing for carp with Gulp minnows and light spinning tackle one time. And you talk about fun, really fun, because we were catching fish that were 10 to 20 pounders on little light powered or medium light powered rods and 16th ounce jigs with gulp minnows. And the key was just sliding that bait in the water real quietly in front of them, and they'd grab it every time. So as soon as you splashed it down, they would spook. As soon as you didn't get it, if it was too far in front of them, they couldn't see it in the muddy water, and they'd swim right by. And a lot of them would bump your line because you're not sure where your bait is either, and then that spooks them. You line them, so to speak. So that's another scenario. But sneaking the bait into the water quietly can be really, really important. And if you can, if they will feed up, which is basically in this scenario, redfish and carp, no bonefish, anything like that. If you can use a surface bait that's light enough that you can still throw it, or a bait that barely sinks, an unweighted bait, like for instance a gulp jerk shad with no weight on it, or a gulp minnow with no weight on a light powered rod, then you can really get them because it sinks really slow, it doesn't make a big splash when it hits, it smells right, it tastes right, and it's a really good way to get fish that you can see, and it sinks very slowly. If I can get them on a surface bait, even better. So let's talk about a surface bait real quick, or a scenario. This one is a little bit more nebulous than fish you can actually see cruising, right? What I'm talking about here is fish you can see rising. Now, this could be a variety of fish, could be a whole bunch of fish in saltwater or freshwater, but I'm talking about fish that are cruising and then picking something up off the surface. It could be a school of white bass that are working their way along the surface and pushing stuff up. It could be trout, which is the most obvious one, and I'll address that one since we just dealt with that here on my home lake. But trout that are coming in and they're feeding their way along. And I can't actually see the fish, but I can see the wake he's making occasionally, and I can for sure see every time he breaks the surface film, and I can determine which way that fish is traveling and how fast. That's really important, because back to this scenario I just said, how far in front of that fish I land is really important. In other words, how much do I lead that fish to get my bait to settle into this, to whatever depth it needs to be at, and not spook the fish, and be able to move it enough to get their attention once they get up to it. So if I can determine how fast a fish is moving in what direction, like these trout were in shallow water where I couldn't quite see them because of the ripple, but you could see them feed. If I landed 2 feet in front of them, I didn't catch any of them. If I landed what I thought was more like 4 or 5 feet in front of them, I caught a whole bunch more of them. And in a lot of the scenarios, I had to land more like 10 feet in front of them. And that's because I think the fish were moving faster than what I realized, because by the time you see the fish roll on the surface and the ripples, what you're seeing a lot of the time is the fish is already headed back down. Unless you're really looking right where he's at, it's the motion that catches your attention, and they're already headed back, whichever direction they were going. They've made their feet on the surface and they're moving on to the next one, and so they're typically ahead of where you thought in the first place. When you see a fish swimming right under the surface, it's his tail that's making the V-wake, and so you got to keep that in mind all the time. Is the fish is farther ahead than what you think. So leading them a certain amount is the whole shooting match, and that's really the hardest part of the whole thing, is determining which direction and how fast is that fish moving. You know he's feeding right on the surface, so your bait needs to not sink very quickly, if at all. And I'm not talking about trying to feed them exactly what they're eating, like you might see a fly guy do on a trout that's feeding. I'm talking about feeding them something with a spinning rod. If you want to do it with a fly rod, throw it in front of them and don't move the bait. And then when the fish is very close, give a tiny little tug on the line, just enough to make your surface bait, your surface fly move. But in that scenario, the fly fishing scenario, it's a straight feeding thing, and you're trying to match what they're actually eating. With the spinning rod, it's more about, hey, this fish is feeding, and I'm going to give them something to grab, something to chase. It could be considered, like for instance, the trout I was talking about right here at my home lake the other day. They were feeding on some sort of little bug. They weren't feeding on anything big, but that won't stop them from eating a 2.5-inch gulp minnow, because it's an opportunity. So while they're in there feeding on those little bugs, well, this little minnow looks pretty good, and I'll go ahead and grab him on the way through. And there's not a lot of scenarios, particularly in a lake situation, stillwater situation, where they won't be opportunistic. They'll eat a lot of different stuff, and now they may not, in a scenario of only dead drifting a size 24 blue-winged olive to fish that are feeding on blue-winged olives, because their brain will selectively zero in on that because those things are so hard to spot. They're so little. The fish will zoom in and focus on that profile and that color and that motion, and that's what their brain is allowing them to do so they can catch as many of those as possible because they need to because they're so small. But a trout that's up and cruising in shallow water in a reservoir somewhere, he's out to eat, period. And he'll eat a cheeseburger, he'll eat the fries, he'll eat a side of tacos, he'll eat whatever on his way through there. And that's really what it's all about. And you notice I keep mentioning gulp in all these scenarios, because it's not that it necessarily gets me more bites, it gets me more committed holding when they bite. Even if a fish like a bedfish picks up a gulp minnow by the tail, 75% of the time he'll go ahead and adjust it and suck the rest of the bait in because it tastes right and it's not an off-putting flavor or whatever to them. And that's why I throw so much gulp in this scenario. The last thing I want is to give them some reason to refuse my stuff because it doesn't smell or taste right. So that's why I throw so much of it. In the case of these trout that were cruising, a 2.5-inch minnow was not a problem at all, as long as I led them enough to where the bait sunk to where they were at, which was only a few inches to a foot under the surface. They were fine. So that's a key thing. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned in any of this, but is almost as important as the glasses are to determine all of these things. And that is the casting accuracy and the ability to make a bait land gently if that's what you need to do. Or in some cases, which I've seen with snook, and this is very specialized, is skipping the bait over the top of the fish. Very more advanced thing, not something you hear a lot about, but I'll tell you what, snook that will refuse a lot of things will not refuse a 5-inch gulp jerk shad that goes skipping over the top of their head. And I've seen a few of those fish just ignite, like they haven't moved in 15 minutes at all. And then they explosively move and grab that thing as it comes skipping over the surface. It triggers an attack for them skipping on the surface. Regardless, whether the bait needs to land gently, like very quietly so as to not spook the fish, or maybe it lands 10 feet in front of the fish, but you need it to splash down to draw their attention and draw them to the bait. That's kind of a musky trick. You see guys do that with musky baits, like a 12-inch long rud, and they throw it and it splashes, and every muskie within 50 yards know that thing hit the water. That can be a scenario as well. But if you're going to do that, you better land it away from the fish and draw the fish to the bait. And that's a big statement. You cannot land that near the fish. Anything that's going to splash down is going to cause you problems more often than not. Now, that's an important thing. So the ability to make the accurate throw. It's one thing to say, I need to lead that fish by 10 feet. It's, okay, I can see him. I can see that there's a ripple there. Then there's a little V-wake. Then there's, okay, over there, he came to the surface. I need to lead him by 10 feet right here. Can you make that throw? Can you make the distance and splash it down gently and make that throw? And that's the key. And I talk about casting accuracy and line control all the time. Along those same lines, the ability to land a cast gently or not gently, very, very important. So that is the two most important things, is good glasses and good casting accuracy and line control will catch you more fish. So there's a million scenarios for sight fishing. The couple things, don't spook the fish first and foremost. That's the single biggest thing, is don't spook them. Figure out which direction they're feeding or looking or moving. Lead them a little bit. Try always to come into their peripheral vision and draw the fish to your bait. And the only scenario where that's not the case, drawing the fish to the bait, is a bedding fish. And again, I don't want to land right on them. I want to land around them and drag my bait to the fish in that scenario. But the reason is that's a defensive bite, not an offensive bite. The only reason he's biting is he doesn't want your stuff near that nest. All the rest of the scenarios I'm talking about is a feeding bite, and that's what it's all about. And there's one more scenario I will talk about that I should have talked about when we were talking about trout in the river, and I'm going to really quickly address this one. Those fish that I said are not feeding at all in the river. There's one trick that can work really well. You see a trout, he's just sitting there. If you can get upstream of that fish, as close to straight upstream as possible. Particularly fish up against the bank is where I've had this work for me the best. You'll see something, typically it'll be a brown trout, it'll be tucked right up against the side of the bank, on the edge where the water and the bank are coming together. There's typically a seam right there. Just hanging a bait in front of that resting fish, just hanging it there, letting it swim in the current, basically will crowd the fish and you can get yourself a defensive strike there as well, similar to bed fishing. So in that scenario, I usually want a big bait. In fact, one time we took the old 10-inch Sebile Magic Swimmer. It was a Sebile back in the day. Now they're in the Berkeley line because Berkeley bought Patrick Sebile out. It's the same bait, but the 10-inch Magic Swimmer, and just letting it swim in the current next to a trout that's 20 inches long, you'd be amazed at how many of them will get really irritated about that bait hanging there and crowding them. It's almost like competition in their resting lane or their feeding lane for that matter, and they'll bite it on anger. Same as a bass will bite a bait on the bed. Defensively, the trout will as well. So that's the only scenario. Those are the only two scenarios where I take the bait to the fish. Every other time, I'm trying to draw the fish to the bait. So that was a little bit long-winded, guys. Sorry about that, but it's a snowy Friday, and it's a topic I really like, and so hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have questions, let me know. Chat at fishfulthinker.com or message me anywhere you'd like. Hopefully you're following along at Fishful Thinker on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We'd appreciate that. Following our YouTube channel as well. So thanks for listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.